There is a river in Europe that has seen more blood spilled along its banks than perhaps any other waterway in human history. It has been a border for 2,000 years. Roman legions died defending it. Medieval kingdoms rose and fell fighting over it. Napoleon crossed it. Hitler fortified it. The Cold War was built on it. And today, it still marks the invisible line between Western and Central Europe, between Latin and Germanic culture, between Catholic and Protestant tradition, between empires that collapsed and nations that endured. This is the Rhine River. And if you want to understand why Europe looks the way it does today, why Germany exists at all, why France became what it became, why the map is drawn the way it's drawn, you have to understand this river. Because the Rhine is not just a river. It is the spine of European history. It is the most fought-over piece of geography on the continent. And the story of who controlled it and why is the story of Europe itself. Let's begin at the beginning, when Rome reached the edge of its world and decided, this is far enough. The Roman frontier, where civilization ended. The year is 12 BC. The Roman Republic is dead, replaced by the Roman Empire under Augustus Caesar. Rome controls the Mediterranean, Gaul, Britannia, Egypt, North Africa, the Balkans. It is the most powerful state on earth. But there is a problem on the northern frontier. Beyond the Rhine River, in the deep forests of Germania, live dozens of tribal confederations, the Germanic peoples. They are not unified. They have no cities in the Roman sense. They do not write. But they are fierce, mobile, and extraordinarily difficult to conquer. And Augustus wants them conquered. He sends his stepson, a general named Drusus, to push Rome's frontier beyond the Rhine. The goal is to reach the Elbe River, farther east, and establish a new Roman province called Germania Magna. It is an ambitious plan, and for a while it works. Drusus campaigns deep into the German interior. He wins battles. He builds forts. He establishes a Roman presence east of the Rhine for the first time. And then, in 9 AD, everything falls apart. A Roman general named Publius Quinctilius Varus is leading 3 legions, 17, 18, and 19, through the Teutoburg forest in what is now northwestern Germany. He is marching to winter quarters. He believes the region is pacified. He is accompanied by Germanic auxiliaries, led by a man named Arminius, a German prince who has been raised in Rome, educated in Roman ways, given Roman citizenship, even served in the Roman military. Varus trusts him completely. Arminius has other plans. The Germanic auxiliaries lead the Roman column into a narrow forest pass. And then they vanish. And then, from every direction, thousands of Germanic warriors, coordinated by Arminius. The battle lasts 3 days. The forest is dense. The ground is muddy. The Romans cannot form their usual disciplined lines. They are separated, surrounded, cut down. Varus, realizing the situation is hopeless, kills himself. Nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers are slaughtered. The 3 legions are annihilated so completely that their numbers are never used again in the Roman military. It is one of the worst defeats in Roman history. When Augustus receives the news in Rome, he is said to have wandered his palace, striking his head against the walls, crying out, "Quinctili ver, legions red. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never recovers them. And Rome never seriously attempts to conquer Germania again. Instead, the Rhine becomes the permanent frontier, the natural border between Roman civilization and the barbarian world, the line that cannot be crossed. For the next 400 years, Rome fortifies the Rhine with a system of military installations, watchtowers, fortresses, and legionary camps that historians call the Limes Germanicus. It is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the ancient world. Legions are stationed along its length. Trade flows across it. Cities grow on the Roman side, Colonia Agrippina, which becomes Cologne, Mogontiacum, which becomes Mainz, Augusta Treverorum, which becomes Trier. These are Roman cities, speaking Latin, practicing Roman law, building Roman architecture. On the other side of the Rhine, Germania, the forest, the tribes, the other world. This division, this idea that the Rhine is where Rome stops and barbarism begins, becomes embedded in European geography. It shapes everything that comes after. Because when Rome finally collapses in the 5th century and the Western Empire disintegrates, the Rhine does not stop being a border. It just becomes a different kind of border. The Franks and the making of Europe. When the Western Roman Empire falls, the Rhine region becomes the frontier of a new power, the Frankish kingdom. The Franks are a Germanic confederation, originally from beyond the Rhine, who gradually move into the Roman territories of Gaul during the late Roman period. By the late 5th century, under a king named Clovis, they control most of what is now France, the Rhineland, and parts of Western Germany. Clovis converts to Christianity, not the Arian Christianity practiced by many other Germanic tribes, but Catholic Christianity, the version endorsed by Rome. This is politically brilliant. It gives the Franks legitimacy in the eyes of the Roman Church and the remaining Gallo-Roman population. It allows them to position themselves as the inheritors of Roman authority. The Rhine, once the edge of Roman civilization, is now the center of the Frankish world. And then, in the year 800, something extraordinary happens. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, conqueror of the Saxons, master of Western and Central Europe, is crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III in Rome on Christmas Day. This is the revival of the Western Roman Empire, at least in theory. Charlemagne's empire stretches from the Atlantic coast to the Elbe River, from the North Sea to northern Italy. It is vast, it is Christian, and it is centered on the Rhine. Charlemagne's capital is Aachen, a city on the Rhine's western tributaries, chosen specifically because it sits at the geographical and cultural crossroads of his empire. It is neither fully Roman Gaul nor fully Germanic territory. It is both. It is the bridge. But empires built by one man rarely survive their builder. When Charlemagne dies in 814, his empire is inherited by his son, Louis the Pious. And when Louis dies in 840, the empire fractures. His 3 surviving sons, Lothair, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald, go to war over the inheritance. The conflict is eventually settled in 843 with the Treaty of Verdun, which divides the Carolingian Empire into 3 kingdoms. Charles the Bald gets West Francia, the territory that will become France. Louis the German gets East Francia, the territory that will become Germany. And Lothair, the eldest, gets Middle Francia, a long, awkward strip of territory running from the Low Countries down through the Rhineland, Burgundy, and into Italy. It includes Aachen. It includes the Rhine. It includes the imperial capital. This is the most important territorial division in European history. And it is a disaster. Middle Francia, Lothair's kingdom, sometimes called Lotharingia, has no natural borders. It is a collection of wealthy, strategically vital territories sandwiched between 2 much larger, more cohesive kingdoms. It cannot defend itself. Within a generation, it begins to break apart. Its pieces are absorbed by East and West Francia. The Rhine, which had been the unifying spine of Charlemagne's empire, becomes the frontier between 2 rival powers, the Kingdom of France to the west and the Kingdom of Germany to the east. This rivalry, this question of who controls the Rhine, who controls Lotharingia, who controls the middle ground, will dominate European politics for the next 1,000 years.
The medieval borderland, kingdoms in conflict. The Rhine in the Middle Ages is not a clean border. It is a fractured, overlapping patchwork of territories, duchies, bishoprics, free cities, petty kingdoms, each claiming different allegiances, each jockeying for power. Some owe loyalty to the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany. Some are vassals of the French king. Some are effectively independent. The most contested region is Alsace and Lorraine, the western bank of the Upper Rhine. These territories are linguistically and culturally mixed. Some areas speak Germanic dialects. Some speak Romance languages derived from Latin. The cities are wealthy. The land is fertile, and both France and the Holy Roman Empire want them. The Holy Roman Empire, which by the 10th century has become the dominant political structure in Germany, claims the Rhine as its natural western boundary. The French crown, meanwhile, pushes eastward whenever it can, seeking to recover the old Carolingian lands that were once part of Charlemagne's empire. This push and pull continues for centuries. In 1214, the Battle of Bouvines is fought in what is now northern France. It is not directly on the Rhine, but it is a decisive moment in the Rhine story. King Philip II of France defeats a coalition led by the Holy Roman Emperor Otto IV and King John of England. The victory solidifies French control over the Western territories and marks the beginning of France's emergence as the dominant power in Western Europe. The Rhine remains contested, but France has the upper hand. Then comes the 100 Years' War, then the 30 Years' War, and with each conflict, the Rhine becomes more entrenched as the fault line of European politics. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, is particularly devastating for the Rhineland. It begins as a religious conflict between Catholic and Protestant states within the Holy Roman Empire, but it quickly becomes a geopolitical free-for-all involving France, Spain, Sweden, Denmark, and dozens of smaller powers. Armies march back and forth across the Rhine, burning cities, destroying crops, displacing populations. The civilian death toll is catastrophic. Some regions lose a third of their population to war, famine, and disease. When the Peace of Westphalia finally ends the war in 1648, the map of Europe is redrawn. France gains significant territories in Alsace. The Holy Roman Empire is weakened. The principle of state sovereignty, the idea that each nation has the right to determine its own affairs without outside interference, is established. And the Rhine, once again, is confirmed as the contested border between French ambition and German fragmentation. But the most important thing to understand about the Rhine in this period is that Germany does not exist yet. There is no unified German state. There is the Holy Roman Empire, which is a loose confederation of hundreds of semi-independent territories, kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, free cities, that owe nominal allegiance to an elected emperor but act independently in almost every practical sense. France, by contrast, is centralizing. It is becoming a modern nation-state with a strong monarchy, a professional army, and an expanding bureaucracy. And the Rhine, that wealthy, strategically vital, politically fragmented borderland, is the natural target of French expansion. Louis XIV and the dream of the natural frontier. In 1643, a 5-year-old boy becomes king of France. His name is Louis. He will reign for 72 years, the longest reign of any major European monarch in history. And he will fundamentally transform France and the Rhine. Louis XIV inherits a powerful kingdom, but he wants more. He wants glory. He wants dominance. And he believes, as many French thinkers of the time believed, in the concept of natural frontiers. The idea is simple. France's borders should follow natural geographic features. The Pyrenees to the south, separating France from Spain. The Alps to the east, separating France from Italy. The Atlantic to the west. And the Rhine to the northeast. This is not just military strategy. It is ideology. The Rhine, in Louis's vision, is France's natural boundary. Everything west of the Rhine should be French. Everything east of it is someone else's problem. Louis spends his reign pursuing this goal. He fights a series of wars: the War of Devolution, the Franco-Dutch War, the 9 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, each one designed, at least in part, to push France's eastern border toward the Rhine. He annexes parts of Alsace. He occupies Strasbourg. He fortifies the left bank of the Rhine with a network of military installations designed by his brilliant military engineer, Vauban. By the end of his reign, Louis has not quite reached the Rhine everywhere he wanted to, but he has moved France significantly eastward. And more importantly, he has embedded the idea of the Rhine as France's natural frontier into French national consciousness. This idea will drive French foreign policy for the next 200 years. On the German side, the reaction to French expansion is fragmented and ineffective. The Holy Roman Empire is too divided to mount a coordinated response. Individual German states, particularly Austria and Brandenburg-Prussia, fight back where they can, but there is no unified German identity, no German nation to rally around. Germany, as a concept, barely exists in the political sense. It is a cultural and linguistic region, not a state. This will change, but not yet.
Napoleon and the Rhine as a French river. The French Revolution begins in 1789. The monarchy falls. The Republic is declared. And within a few years, revolutionary France is at war with almost every major power in Europe. The Coalition Wars, the series of conflicts between revolutionary and later Napoleonic France and various European coalitions, will reshape the continent. And the Rhine, once again, is at the center. Napoleon Bonaparte comes to power in 1799. By 1804, he has declared himself Emperor of the French. And like Louis XIV before him, Napoleon believes in the natural frontier. The Rhine must be French. Not just militarily occupied, actually, administratively, permanently French. Napoleon achieves this with stunning speed. In a series of brilliant military campaigns between 1805 and 1807, he defeats Austria, Prussia, and Russia. He dissolves the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, ending a political entity that had existed in some form for over 800 years. He reorganizes the German territories into the Confederation of the Rhine, a collection of client states under French protection. The left bank of the Rhine, the entire western side, is annexed directly into France. Cities like Cologne, Mainz, and Koblenz become French cities. French law is imposed. French administrators govern. The Rhine is, for the first time since the Romans, fully controlled by a single power. This is the high point of French domination over the Rhine. And it lasts less than a decade. Napoleon's empire collapses between 1812 and 1814. The disastrous invasion of Russia. The Battle of Leipzig, where a coalition of Russian, Prussian, Austrian, and Swedish forces defeat Napoleon's army in what becomes known as the Battle of Nations. The abdication. The exile to Elba. The brief return during the 100 Days. Waterloo. Final exile to St. Helena. When the victorious powers meet at the Congress of Vienna in 1814 to 1815 to redraw the map of Europe after Napoleon's defeat, one of the central questions is, what do we do about the Rhine? France is stripped of its conquests. The left bank of the Rhine is returned to German control, but not to the old, fragmented Holy Roman Empire. That institution is gone. Instead, the territories are reorganized into a smaller number of larger German states, with Prussia emerging as the dominant power in the Rhineland. Prussia is given significant territory along the Rhine specifically to act as a buffer against future French expansion. The idea is to create a strong German presence on the river to prevent France from ever crossing it again. This decision, to make Prussia the guardian of the Rhine, will have enormous consequences. Because Prussia, in the decades that follow, will use its position on the Rhine to unify Germany. And unified Germany will become the dominant power in Central Europe. And that will set the stage for everything that comes next. The Rhine in the age of nationalism. The 19th century is the age of nationalism. Across Europe, peoples who share a common language, culture, and history begin demanding political unity. Italy unifies. Germany unifies. And the Rhine, which had been a border between fragmented territories for centuries, becomes a symbol of national identity. For Germans, the Rhine is sacred ground. It is the river of the Nibelungenlied, the great medieval German epic. It is the river where the Lorelei, the mythical siren, lures sailors to their doom. It is the homeland, the Vaterland, the heart of German culture. The idea that France might claim the Rhine as its natural frontier is, to German nationalists, an existential threat. The Rhine is German. It must remain German. In 1840, a French government official named Adolphe Thiers makes a speech calling for France to reclaim the Rhine as its eastern boundary. The reaction in Germany is explosive. A poet named Nikolaus Becker writes a song called Der Deutsche Rhein, the German Rhine, which becomes a nationalist anthem. The refrain, "They shall not have it, the free German Rhine." Hundreds of thousands of Germans sing it. The Rhine, in the German imagination, is the line that must never be crossed. France, meanwhile, has its own national mythology around the Rhine. The revolutionary armies had crossed it. Napoleon had made it French. The humiliation of 1815, being forced back behind the Rhine, is still a bitter memory. and the loss of Alsace and parts of Lorraine, which France controlled under Louis XIV and Napoleon, is seen as a historical injustice. This collision of national mythologies, French revanchism versus German nationalism, creates an explosive situation. And the man who will light the fuse is Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck becomes minister-president of Prussia in 1862. He is a conservative, a monarchist, and a strategic genius. His goal is to unify Germany under Prussian leadership, and he understands that to do this, he needs to defeat the two major obstacles to German unity: Austria, which claims leadership of the German-speaking world, and France, which opposes any strong unified German state on its eastern border. Bismarck defeats Austria in 1866 in the Austro-Prussian War, effectively excluding Austria from German politics. And then, in 1870, he engineers a confrontation with France. The Franco-Prussian War begins in July 1870. France, under Emperor Napoleon III, declares war on Prussia, expecting a quick victory. Instead, the Prussian military, organized, modern, and supported by the other German states, crushes the French army in a series of devastating battles. Napoleon III is captured at the Battle of Sedan. Paris is besieged, and in January 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the great palace of Louis XIV, the king who had once dreamed of pushing France to the Rhine, the German Empire is proclaimed. Germany is unified, and as part of the peace settlement, France is forced to cede Alsace and most of Lorraine, the territories on the western bank of the Upper Rhine, to the new German Empire. This is one of the most consequential territorial transfers in modern European history. Alsace-Lorraine becomes the symbol of Franco-German enmity. For France, it is the lost provinces, the stolen lands that must be recovered. For Germany, it is rightfully reclaimed territory, German in language and culture, restored to the German nation. The Rhine, which had been a contested frontier for 1,000 years, is now firmly German. And the question of whether France will ever get it back will dominate European politics for the next 75 years. The First World War and the Rhine question. When World War I begins in August 1914, one of France's primary war aims is clear: take back Alsace-Lorraine, reclaim the Rhine, reverse the humiliation of 1871. The war lasts 4 years. It is catastrophic. Millions die. Empires collapse. And when it finally ends in November 1918 with Germany's defeat, the victorious Allies gather at Versailles to decide the shape of the post-war world. France, led by Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, has a clear agenda. Clemenceau is a fierce nationalist who remembers the Franco-Prussian War and has spent his political career demanding revenge. He wants Alsace-Lorraine returned to France. That is non-negotiable. But he also wants more. He wants the Rhineland, the entire left bank of the Rhine, separated from Germany, either as an independent buffer state or directly annexed to France. He wants Germany permanently weakened, dismembered, and incapable of threatening France ever again. The American president, Woodrow Wilson, opposes this. Wilson believes in self-determination, the principle that peoples should govern themselves. The Rhineland is German-speaking, German in culture. To tear it away from Germany would be, in Wilson's view, unjust and counterproductive. It would create lasting resentment and plant the seeds of future conflict. The British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, is somewhere in the middle. He wants Germany punished, but not annihilated. He fears that a Germany too severely humiliated will become unstable and dangerous. The compromise reached at Versailles is this: Alsace-Lorraine is returned to France. The Rhineland remains part of Germany, but it is demilitarized. No German troops, no fortifications. Allied forces will occupy the Rhineland for 15 years to ensure compliance. The idea is to create a buffer zone that protects France without actually annexing German territory. It is a compromise that satisfies no one. France feels it did not get enough security. Germany feels humiliated and betrayed. And the Rhineland, demilitarized and occupied, becomes a symbol of German defeat. In the years that follow, the Versailles settlement comes under increasing pressure. The Great Depression devastates the German economy. Political extremism rises. And in 1933, Adolf Hitler comes to power. Hitler, the Rhine, and the path to war. Adolf Hitler bases much of his political appeal on reversing the Versailles Treaty. He calls it a diktat, a dictated peace imposed by the victors on a defeated nation. He promises to restore German pride, rebuild the military, and reclaim Germany's rightful place in Europe. And the Rhineland is one of his first targets. On March 7, 1936, Hitler orders German troops to march into the Rhineland and reoccupy it. This is a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty and the later Locarno treaties, which had reaffirmed the demilitarization of the region. It is also an enormous gamble. Hitler's military is still weak. If France or Britain responds with force, Germany will have to retreat and Hitler's government may collapse. But France and Britain do nothing. They protest diplomatically, but they do not act. The French military, despite being far stronger than the German military at this point, is not mobilized. The French government is divided, unstable, and unwilling to risk another war. Britain, still traumatized by World War I, sees no reason to fight over what many British politicians view as Germany simply moving troops into its own territory. Hitler's gamble succeeds. German forces occupy the Rhineland without firing a shot. And the psychological effect is enormous. Hitler's prestige soars. His belief in his own infallibility deepens. The Western powers, he concludes, are weak and will not stand up to him. This is the moment where World War II arguably becomes inevitable, because once the Rhineland is remilitarized, Germany can fortify it. And once Germany fortifies it, the balance of power in Europe shifts decisively. France, which had relied on the Rhineland as a buffer, is now exposed. Germany, which had been vulnerable on its western frontier, is now secure. 3 years later, in September 1939, Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. The Rhine, once again, is at the center of the conflict. In 1940, Germany invades France through the Low Countries and the Ardennes, bypassing the Maginot Line. France collapses in 6 weeks. The Rhine, which France had dreamed of as its natural frontier for centuries, is now under complete German control. For the next 4 years, the Rhine is the border of Fortress Europe, the western edge of Nazi-occupied territory. And when the tide of war finally turns, when the Allies begin pushing into Germany from the west, the Rhine becomes the last major defensive line. Crossing the Rhine, the final barrier. By early 1945, the Allied armies have liberated France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They stand on the western bank of the Rhine. And beyond the river, Germany itself. The Rhine is formidable. It is wide, fast-flowing, and heavily defended. The Germans have destroyed most of the bridges. They have fortified the eastern bank. They know that once the Allies cross the Rhine, the war is essentially over. The Rhine is Germany's last hope. The first major crossing happens in March 1945. The U.S. 9th Armored Division, advancing toward the city of Remagen, discovers that the Ludendorff Bridge, one of the few remaining intact bridges across the Rhine, has not been destroyed. German engineers have tried to blow it up, but the demolition charges have only partially detonated. The bridge is damaged, but it is still standing. American forces rush across. They establish a bridgehead on the eastern bank. The Germans launch desperate counterattacks to dislodge them, but the Americans hold. Within days, thousands of Allied troops and hundreds of tanks have crossed the Rhine at Remagen. The barrier is broken. Within weeks, the Allies are across the Rhine in multiple places. British and Canadian forces cross in the north. American forces cross in the center and south. The German military, already exhausted and outnumbered, collapses. Berlin falls in April. Hitler kills himself in his bunker. Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. The Rhine, which had been Europe's most contested border for 2,000 years, has been decisively crossed. And in the ruins of Germany, the question arises once more: who will control the Rhine now? The Cold War and the frozen frontier. After World War II, Germany is divided. The western zones, occupied by the United States, Britain, and France, become the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. The eastern zone, occupied by the Soviet Union, becomes the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. The division runs not along the Rhine, but through the center of Germany, splitting Berlin itself. But the Rhine still matters, because the Rhine marks the boundary between two different visions of post-war Europe. On the western side of the Rhine, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and eventually West Germany form the core of what will become the European Union. The Rhine, which had been a barrier for centuries, becomes a connector. The waterway that divided now unites. Trade flows freely. The Rhine becomes one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. In 1950, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman proposes the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, a supranational organization that would pool French and German coal and steel production under a common authority. The idea is simple and radical. If France and Germany cannot fight over coal and steel, they cannot fight a war. The Rhine region, with its massive industrial capacity, is at the center of this project. The ECSC is the seed of the European Union. It begins with coal and steel. It expands to include economic integration, political cooperation, and eventually a common currency and open borders. And the Rhine, the river that had been Europe's bloodiest frontier, becomes the symbol of European unity. This is, in many ways, the most extraordinary transformation in European history. The Rhine, which had defined Franco-German enmity for 1,000 years, now defines Franco-German partnership. The two nations that fought 3 devastating wars in 70 years, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I and World War II, are now allies, bound together by institutions that make another war between them not just unlikely but structurally impossible. But this transformation only happens on the western side of Europe. On the eastern side, beyond the Iron Curtain, the Cold War is in full swing. The Rhine, in this context, is not the border itself. The Iron Curtain runs farther east. But the Rhine is still symbolically important. It marks the edge of the Western world, the boundary of NATO, the frontier of the free world as Western leaders define it. And when the Cold War ends in 1989, when the Berlin Wall falls and Germany reunifies in 1990, the Rhine is finally, definitively, no longer a contested border. It is a river in a unified Germany that is part of a peaceful, integrated Europe. The Rhine today, a river transformed. If you visit the Rhine today, you will find a waterway transformed beyond recognition from its violent past. It is one of the most economically vital rivers on Earth. Over 300 million tons of cargo pass through it every year. Cities like Rotterdam, Cologne, and Basel are connected by an unbroken chain of commerce. The Rhine is a highway, a lifeline, a foundation of European prosperity. But the Rhine is also a historical monument. Along its banks, you can still see the remnants of 2,000 years of conflict. There are Roman ruins, the remains of the Limes Germanicus, the fortified frontier that once separated the civilized world from the barbarians. In cities like Trier and Mainz, you can walk through Roman gates, see Roman walls, stand in Roman amphitheaters. There are medieval castles, dozens of them, perched on hillsides overlooking the river, each one a reminder of the feudal world when the Rhine was not a national border but a patchwork of competing lordships. The most famous stretch, the Middle Rhine Valley, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site precisely because of the density of these castles. There are Napoleonic monuments, Prussian fortifications, World War I memorials, World War II bunkers and destroyed bridges that were never rebuilt. And there is, of course, the cultural memory. The Rhine is Germany's national river in a way that no other river is. It is the river of German poetry, music, mythology. Wagner's Ring Cycle, perhaps the most famous operatic work in history, is set along the Rhine. The Rhine is Wagnerian, romantic, mythic. It is the river where gods walk and heroes die. But it is also, increasingly, a European river. The Rhine does not belong to Germany alone anymore. It flows through 6 countries: Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. It is governed by international treaties. It is protected by environmental agreements. It is, in a very real sense, the shared property of Europe. This is the Rhine's final transformation, from a barrier to a bond. Why the Rhine mattered. the deep lessons. So why does the Rhine matter? Why does this one river, out of all the rivers in Europe, define the continent's history? The answer is geography, but it is also psychology. Geographically, the Rhine is a natural frontier. It is wide enough, fast enough, and defensible enough to serve as a border. It is also economically vital, a trade route, a source of water, a transportation artery. Any power that controls the Rhine controls the wealth of northwestern Europe. This makes it worth fighting over. But the Rhine also became a psychological border, a line in the mind as much as on the map. The Romans decided the Rhine was the edge of civilization, and that idea stuck. For centuries afterward, the Rhine was where the Latin world ended and the Germanic world began. It was the border between France and Germany, between Catholic and Protestant, between West and East. And once a border is established in people's minds, it becomes incredibly hard to erase. Even when the political facts change, even when treaties are signed and alliances formed, the mental map remains. The Rhine was the border because everyone believed it was the border. And because everyone believed it, they fought over it. And because they fought over it, it became the border again. This is the deep lesson of the Rhine. Borders are not just physical lines. They are stories. They are narratives about who belongs where, about which peoples are compatible and which are not, about where civilization ends and chaos begins. And those narratives, once established, have enormous power. The Rhine was Europe's story of division. And for 2,000 years, that story was self-fulfilling. But stories can change. In the second half of the 20th century, Europeans chose a different story. They chose integration over division. They chose partnership over rivalry. They chose to make the Rhine not a barrier, but a bridge. And that choice, fragile, contested, never guaranteed, has given Europe the longest period of peace in its recorded history. The river flows on. Today, if you stand on a bridge over the Rhine, in Strasbourg, say, or Cologne or Basel, you will see cargo ships passing underneath. You will see tourists on river cruises, taking photographs of the medieval castles on the hillsides. You will see the cities glowing on both banks, prosperous and peaceful. It is hard, standing there, to imagine the violence this river has seen. The Roman legions who died defending it. The medieval armies who burned their way up and down its length. The millions of soldiers who crossed it in 1940, in 1945. The generations of French and German children who were taught that the Rhine was the border, the frontier, the place where the enemy began. But history does not disappear just because we choose not to remember it. The Rhine remembers. The stones remember. The monuments remember. And if we are wise, we remember too. Because the Rhine story is not just about the past. It is about the choices we make in the present. It is about whether we see borders as barriers or as opportunities. It is about whether we define ourselves by what divides us or by what unites us. It is about whether we learn from history or repeat it. The Rhine, for 2,000 years, was Europe's river of war. It defined empires. It started conflicts. It separated peoples who spoke different languages, practiced different faiths, swore loyalty to different kings. And then, in the space of a single generation, it became something else. A river of peace. A river of trade. A river that connects rather than divides. That transformation did not happen by accident. It happened because people chose it. Because leaders on both sides of the river decided that the old story, the story of eternal enmity, no longer served them. Because French and Germans, after centuries of killing each other, looked across the Rhine and said, "Enough." The Rhine flows on, indifferent to human borders and human conflicts. It has flowed for millions of years. It will flow for millions more. The river does not care who controls it, who crosses it, who dies along its banks. But we care. We live with the consequences of the choices our ancestors made. And we pass those consequences to our children. The Rhine is a reminder that history is not fate. That the borders we inherit are not permanent. That the enmities we are taught are not inevitable. That peace is possible even after centuries of war, but only if we choose it, and only if we defend it, and only if we remember what came before. The river flows on. The story continues. And the question the Rhine has asked Europe for 2,000 years, is whether we will use it to divide us or to bring us together. If you made it this far, thank you. This is the kind of history I believe matters most. Not just battles and dates, but the deeper patterns, the choices that echo across centuries, the ways geography shapes human destiny. The Rhine is one of those places where you can see all of European history compressed into a single landscape. Every empire that ever mattered in Europe has fought over this river. Every major conflict has touched it. And the fact that it is now peaceful, that you can drive across it without a passport, that French and German children learn about it in school not as a frontier but as a shared heritage, is one of history's genuine miracles. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider subscribing. There are so many more stories like this one, places where geography and human choice collide, where the long arc of history bends in unexpected ways. Leave a comment below. Have you ever visited the Rhine? Did any part of this story surprise you? What other borders or rivers should we explore next? And if you want more content about European history, World War II, or the forces that shaped the modern world, check out the playlist linked in the description. We are just getting started. I'll see you in the next one.